At this time, I would like to introduce you to Christina, our moderator. Christina, the floor is yours.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We're very excited to welcome a number of you from actually around the globe. So for those of you who are returning to Canadian Management Centre, welcome back. And for those of you who are new, just to give you some background information, our organization is focused on preparing the next generation of leaders to thrive in tomorrow's marketplace. So we are a national organization operating within Canada, delivering both open enrollment programs as well as customized on-site solutions for our clients in a number of different topic areas ranging from communications to management and leadership as well as in project management. For those of you who may be wanting to join the conversation online today through Twitter, we are available on Twitter. Our handle is @Canadian Management, and you can use the hashtag CMC events to join the conversation online. We will be asking you for participation today as we go through today's session, so we'll give you some cues as to when we'll engage you for that. We often get asked about when you'll be able to get access to a recording of today's session, so you will get access to a recording of the event today that will give you a visual of the slides, and you'll be able to hear all of the amazing secrets broadcast again to you. So stay tuned for a follow-up email on how you'll receive that. I am joined today by one of our esteemed facilitators, Julie Godstave. Julie joined Canadian Management Centre as a facilitator in 2011, and she has her own consulting practice where she spent over 15 years working in small businesses as well as large organizations, helping to support the development of individuals and organizations in the areas of communications, sales management, as well as facilitation. And Julie is actually one of our facilitators who focuses on our presentation skills programs, both in our open enrollment space as well as for the solutions we deliver on-site with our clients. So Julie, I'm thrilled to welcome you here today, and I do know that we have a lot to get through, so I'll pass it over to you so that we can get started.
Thank you very much, Christina, and welcome everyone to our webinar today. This is a really fascinating topic and one that I really, really love. I've done hundreds of presentations to small groups of 3 to 5 to over 500. So today my goal is going to be to share some of the secrets, some of my learnings with you. So what are we going to cover? We're going to identify some strategies to improve your ability to create and deliver impactful presentations, learn those 5 secrets of successful presenters that will enhance your credibility, get ideas to adjust the way you present in a virtual environment like we're doing today, and build your confidence to present by refining the way you prepare. So, 5 secrets of successful presenters. Most of you may know her, a popular pop icon, Katy Perry. She's been quoted saying, if you're presenting yourself with confidence, you can pull off pretty much anything. And really, we couldn't agree more. If you've had the good fortune of seeing her like I have, she can really pull off a lot of amazing things with incredible confidence. And that's really what presenting is about. Doing this well is so important, and it can make a huge difference in both your personal and professional life. Really learning how to articulate your message, deliver with confidence, helps improve your credibility, your ability to influence, and ultimately gets you the outcomes that you want and you're looking for. So we're going to go to a poll here, and I want to find out where you would rate your own feelings about presenting. Are you on the terrified end of the spectrum? Perhaps you're super confident around presenting. Maybe you just want to learn some new tips today, or perhaps you're even in the middle. So we're going to open up the polls and get you to tell us where your feelings reside.
Great, thanks, Julie. So the poll is opening up for you on the right-hand side of your screen, so you have the options available there to select from. And really, whether you are somebody who's new to presenting, haven't actually done it before, or you might be an experienced presenter, for all of us, there's a lot of nerves that can come into play when we're moving into a presentation environment or about to deliver a speech or have to even ask a question in a meeting in some cases. So really, we're trying to get a sense of where you would rate your feelings around presenting. So as Julie said, the options are A, terrified, B, don't enjoy presenting, but you will do it, C, slightly nervous but capable, D, you're comfortable presenting, or E, you're very confident. So Jess, maybe we could go ahead and close out the poll so that we could see where we netted out with the results. And we find in this situation when we're asking a question about your feelings around presenting, sometimes it might depend on who you're presenting to or what you might actually be presenting or what's at stake for you. So we can appreciate that it may vary. But we'll wrap up the poll to be able to get the results. And it looks like the majority, Julie, are 49% in option C, slightly nervous but capable. Second was don't enjoy presenting but will. And the third was comfortable presenting at 19%.
Okay, good. I'm glad I don't see too much under the terrified. You've probably seen some of the stats out there that many people say they would rather die than present. So I'm glad that isn't the case here, that most of you are comfortable. But it's okay to be nervous, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. Thanks, Christina. Okay, so one of the things to think about that's really an automatic confidence booster is something called the power pose. So we're going to ask each of you to take a moment and realize how your posture is right now. So are you hunched over at your computer? Are you sitting down, shoulders slumped over? Take another moment and think about how you feel right now. Do you feel tired? Maybe thinking about an afternoon snack or coffee? Would you feel comfortable presenting to your boss if they were to walk up to you right now? That's an interesting one. Maybe if you're sitting right now, and most of you may be in front of computers, I'm going to ask you to stand up. I know we can't see you, but I want you to go ahead and stand up. So if you're standing, I want you to stand tall, push your chest out, shoulders back, put your hands on your hips, and stay there for a moment in this position. I want you to recognize how this makes you feel compared to when you were just sitting down. So stay standing for a moment. According to research conducted by Amy Cuddy on this topic, taking a few moments in what is called a power pose, like what you're doing right now, can help you change your mindset, which can ultimately help you to elicit a more confident demeanor. She's done a lot of research and had subjects conduct a few simple power poses like this one, standing with your hands on your hips or putting your hands up in the air, chest forward, and holding these poses before an interview. And people that have held these poses appear more confident, enthusiastic, have a greater presence, and actually tend to be the ones who are selected for the jobs. So there's some physiology behind this, and when we actually stand in these power pose type of positions, our physiology changes. We see an increase in those hormones that make us feel more powerful, more confident, and that's really important. So I'd encourage you, the next time you have to make a presentation, to do some of this power posing before you do your presentation. Now, probably not a great idea to do this in front of the audience, but close your door and do some of these poses in your office or go into the bathroom. Find a place where you can do this to build your confidence. It's called power posing. Really interesting. Okay. We're going to move to another poll here. And thinking about the last presentation you attended that was really, really good, tell us what was good about it by writing your responses in the chat panel. So I want you to think back to a recent presentation and one that you may have walked out of and went, wow, that was fantastic. What made it so great?
Thanks so much, Julie. So everyone on the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen, you can go ahead and enter in your options. And if you wouldn't mind just sending it to all panelists so that we have an option of being able to see it. So the responses are coming in, Julie, so I'll go ahead and share some of them.
Okay.
Diana has said that the presentation was something that was funny. There was a confident speaker, again, funny speaker, use of humor. It was engaging and of interest. It was well-paced and not rushed. Speaker spoke naturally. The presenter told a story. There was some interaction with us. The presenter was knowledgeable about the topics. Again, use of humor coming up a lot. Used examples, good eye contact, very informative with some humor but wasn't rushed. The presenter was passionate about their topic. There were some group exercises, so it was interactive. I was engaged and involved. The tone made me attentive, that they could resonate with the content. Strong voice, captivating, funny, but yet a strong presenter. So a lot of shared responses in the details that are coming in. So thank you, everyone, for your input.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm seeing some common themes there. Passionate, prepared, some humor, on time. Really, really critical to great presenters. So you've hit on some really good points that in order to make a presentation successful, we have to incorporate some of those things. So now let's move along and share with you the 5 secrets to successful presentations. Secret 1, target the presentation to your audience. This is really, really important. And quite often when we're asked to present, our first thought is, what are we going to say and how are we going to do this? What do we need to say? That's important. But the one thing we really need to think about first is, who are we presenting to? We need to shift that focus from ourselves to who the audience is. And it's really important to be able to find out who these people are so that we can tailor our presentation to them. So knowing your audience is fundamental. And a few questions to ask yourself about your audience. Why are they attending? What's their intention? We need to think about where they are instead of where we want to take them. So why are they coming to our presentation? The next question is, who are they? Who are these people? Do we know them on a personal basis, professionally? Are there hot spots, things that are important to them? What's their experience, their goal? Thinking about their style. So who are they? The next question, what do they know? Maybe they already know something about your topic and you don't have to speak about that. What do they want to know? What do they need to know? Put yourself in the shoes of your audience. The next question, what is their interest, their attitude toward you, your company, your topic? What motivates them? What is a trigger for them? Finding out as much as you can about your audience. And that last W that you see there, that WIIFM, I like to think about that as the radio station that we are all tuned into as learners, hence the FM at the end of that. That WIIFM, and I write this one down, stands for what's in it for me. And that's putting yourself in the shoes of your audience. So what is in it for me? If I'm coming to your presentation, what am I going to get out of that? So if we can start thinking about tailoring our presentations to our audience's point of view, we're going to be much more successful.
Thanks for
knowing your audience.
Yes, it's a great tip to be able to share with those of you who are listening today. And I really think that why are they attending question is a really good one to reflect on, because so often when we're in presentation mode, we get so anxious about wanting to get out what we have to share with people or what we want to tell them, and we might go into an over data share or a data dump. And this gives you a chance to really think about where people are at when they're coming in and what you need to do to influence their thinking as you move through whatever message it is that you need to deliver.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Christina. Secret 2, knowing your desired outcome. So knowing our audience, the previous slide, is important, but it's also important to know what our desired outcome is. having a goal for our presentation is really important. So when we think about what our desired outcome is, we can think about that around 3 different boxes. And those would be to inform our audience, to influence, or entertain. So I want you to think about a presentation that you are going to give, and I want you to think about, am I presenting this to inform someone? Maybe that's sharing information, creating awareness, building credibility. If you think about someone that may be in sales, that may be just to meet a new client, establish some rapport, inform them about your product or service. Influence is really shifting someone's thinking, getting them to make a decision, getting their support. Maybe it's buying a product that you sell. And lastly, entertaining. Perhaps recognizing someone, celebrating a milestone or an achievement, maybe a toast at someone's wedding you've been asked to do. So I want you to think about the outcome that you're trying to achieve, just to give us an idea of what you're planning.
So we are going to open up a poll, or we have opened up a poll so that we can get your input on the outcome that you're trying to achieve. So you could be thinking about a presentation that you have coming up or one of the recent presentations that you've delivered. But when you think about the outcomes as Julie defined them as to whether or not you were trying to inform or share information, influencing whether you're shifting somebody's thinking or perspective, or to entertain. And again, that could be socially, but that could also be in the work environment if you're having to deliver a recognition message or you're doing a quick presentation of the town hall. And given that humor seemed to be a point that a lot of people mentioned today in terms of presentations that are memorable, it could be that that's part of your goal in some of what you're trying to deliver. So Jess, if we could go ahead and close out the poll. And I have a question that's come in from one of our participants, Julie. So before we review the results of the poll, I've got someone who's asking, what if you know going into a presentation that people might not be interested in your topic? Are there any ways of being able to increase their awareness or interest or maybe enthusiasm about the topic that you're presenting?
Thanks, Christina. That's a really good question. And, something that is definitely worth exploring, finding out who's coming to your presentation prior to, if that's possible. And I would say even finding out from those attending what they are interested in learning or knowing. That way you can tailor your presentation to fit those needs, asking some questions around the content, what they would like to see at the end of the presentation, what they would like to see for an outcome. Having those conversations, of course, if you have the time prior to drafting your presentation, would be a great way to make it interesting.
Thanks, Julie. So the results are in from the poll, and it looks like we've got the majority of people, over 60%, indicating that their outcome that they're trying to achieve is inform, and 37% are indicating that they need to influence, and then the balance are looking at entertain. And we did have one participant, George, who mentioned a suggested fourth outcome is sometimes to reach a decision about something after you've provided the necessary information. So, George, we agree. We sort of, in our minds, grouped that under influence because you're trying to influence people, not necessarily to move in the direction that you want them to, but you're trying to get them to a point where they can make a decision. So that could definitely fall within those categories. But thank you for that suggestion. So, Julie, it looks like the majority of people are in the inform bucket, so 60% at trying to inform their attendees.
And I would say that's pretty typical. And I would also say that that's a good opportunity to reconnect back to that what's in it for me or what's in it for your audience members. Oftentimes we are tasked with giving information, which would be to inform. So knowing what our audiences really want to get out of that and how that information will affect them will definitely help you deliver a message that's more effective and get you the outcome that you want. So So moving on to secret 3, leveraging a framework to build your presentation. So we've talked about knowing your audience and knowing your purpose, inform, influence, or entertain. Now it comes to looking at the content and thinking about how do I build this? Now we're not opening this up to a poll, but I'm going to ask you this question, just something for you to think about is how many of you are what I like to call presentation wingers? And what do I mean by that? I mean somebody has asked you to make a presentation and you wing it, meaning you don't plan ahead as much as you perhaps could have. And sometimes we can't because we don't have the time. But there are other times where we procrastinate or other reasons, or we don't know what to do and where to start, so we just wing it. So I'm hoping after today's webinar that you won't wing any more presentations, because when we do that, we risk not being able to get out the message that we want to get out, to make our presentation clear, to meet the needs of our audience. So we're going to move into a nice framework for helping you build your presentation. And you'll see on your slide, it's titled Presentation Parameters. I like to visualize this as like the 40,000-foot overview of your presentation. So really a base structure, a draft on how you go about building it. So if you follow along with me, the top left-hand corner is the subject. So this is a really neutral statement of what you're going to talk about in your presentation. So what are you going to tell people, your subject? So if we bring this to life with an example, let's say your company is considering upgrading computers. So computer upgrade options are available. So that's what you want to be talking about. So then we move over to the right-hand side and we see purpose. So this is your overriding intention, back to that inform, influence, or entertain. This is like the what and the who. Why are you telling them? So what are you telling them, and then why are you telling them? So if we go back to that computer option, the example here would be to influence the senior management at your company to invest in a new computer upgrade. So we've got our subject, we've just done our purpose, now we move down clockwise into relevance. This is where you ask yourself, how will the audience benefit from the presentation? This is really that what's in it for me, what's in it for your audience that we talked about earlier. So why should they listen? Why should they care? Well, if we look at that computer example, if we upgrade our computer, we're looking at increased productivity perhaps, lower cost, reduced risk of incompatibility with other systems. And then we move to the outcome, desired outcome. Last box there. How will the state of the audience change as a result of the presentation? So basically, what will they or should they do as a result of coming and listening to your presentation? If we were to be successful in this, we would perhaps have our senior management say, yes, we think this is really relevant that we invest in those necessary computer upgrades, and we're going to do that. So when you go about planning your presentation, keep these 4 boxes in mind. This is really the launching pad. And then, of course, you're going to add more detail to what your actual presentation is about to support the computer upgrades, for example, the whys behind that. But the subject, purpose, relevance, and outcome are questions that you need to answer before you get started. So what happens when we don't have a plan? Well, we often run into some pitfalls, poor structure. So poor structure in a presentation, not having a plan, giving too much data, data overload or data dumping, I call it, too much information. The risk of that, and I've seen it happen before, is you run out of time and you don't ever get to your message. How about you look out and you see the audience's eyes glazing over? Something important to remember is your audience is your mirror. If you look out and you see people sleeping, chances are perhaps you're boring them. Losing their attention, not meeting your intended outcome. people leaving the presentation before you're finished, not getting people back for the next presentation, or not getting participation or engagement, getting a poor evaluation. How about this one? Not getting asked back to present. So some pitfalls to consider. I once upon a time saw a presenter at a large conference who kept going beyond his time limit. Probably had about 100 people and kept going and kept talking, and people needed to leave, so they started leaving, and I think he was probably left with about 15 people. Didn't even stop to realize people were leaving. So a poorly planned presentation. So you want to try and avoid those pitfalls by proper planning.
Julie, we've got a question coming in from a participant asking about whether or not you have a suggestion on time of day to present, to perhaps not get stuck into a trap where people may have low energy. So any suggestion on a time of day to schedule a presentation?
Yes, thank you for your question. My recommendation would be to avoid Mondays and Fridays, if at all possible. I know it isn't always possible, but oftentimes on a Monday morning, people are coming back in with a lot of things on their plate for the day, and often on a Friday, people are getting into weekend mode. So I would encourage you, if you can, to schedule your presentations for Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and ideally the morning is when we are fresher. Probably the absolute worst time to do a presentation is after lunch, when people have a full stomach, they are tired, etc. So mornings are the best times when people are fresh.
Okay, great. Thank you. I guess we're going to keep on moving to go to Secret 4.
Okay. Secret 4, mind the body language. This is really, really important when presenting. Your verbal and nonverbal language, being aware of both of those. We call it the 3 V's of presenting. So firstly, there's the message, what we've talked about this far, what you're planning, your plan, your structure, but then comes a piece on delivering that. And we need to be really mindful of how those pieces really influence our presentation. So we call them the 3 V's. The 3 V's would be verbal, vocal, and visual. And this comes from very well-researched information. You'll see on the bottom of that slide a reference, Dr. Albert Morabian, and he did extensive research on communications. And this really holds true today. If you look at that graph, you'll see the yellow or gold section of that pie is 55%. So this is how we interpret messaging. 55% is based on the visual component, how we look. The blue piece is 38%, and that's the vocal piece, how we sound. And that last little piece of the pie there that you see in green is what we call the verbal piece. Those are the words used. So if you look at that graph, you will see that 93% of communication, how we interpret communications, is based on how we look and how we sound. So it's often quite funny in a lot of workshops that I do, the first question that comes up is, well, geez, if it's so important how I look and how I sound, it doesn't really matter what I say, does it, as long as I look good and I sound good? Well, maybe there's some truth to that. It also still does matter what you say. That 7% is still important. But what we often don't give enough attention to is how we look and how we sound. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So being mindful of body language, physical appearance, how we dress, how we show up. So dressing appropriately is really important. Dressing to reflect your audience, the image of your company, the group you represent. I like to say you are really your brand. So whatever company it is you work for, you are representing that company when you present. So when in doubt, being more on the formal or conservative side. What we don't want to happen with our physical appearance is we don't want anything to be a distraction. And when I say a distraction, I'm talking about really brightly colored clothing or inappropriate clothing, anything that distracts us, being too casual, really flashy jewelry, anything that distracts from our presentation. Remember, when we're presenting, we're trying to get our message across and often looking for outcomes. We don't want the way we look to be a distraction. So physical appearance matters. Remember that power of first impression. People often judge us before we even speak. Facial expression. Also important. It's really pivotal in communicating our attitude toward our presentation and the audience. It sends a message about our sincerity, about our comfort level, and it sets the tone. We want to think about being at ease with our audience. So if we have a really tense facial expression, remembering our audience is a mirror, they may reflect that back. We also talk about something called congruence in messaging. Does our facial expression match our message? So if we're speaking about something light and positive, having a smile on our face is really important. If we're speaking about something very serious, likely that smile isn't right for that message. So matching or congruency in our messaging. How we stand is important. That's that body language. Remember that 55% visual piece, and it creates an impression. Remember the power poses we talked about before. So how we actually hold ourselves when we present is really important. Are you standing tall? Are you slumped over? Do you look confident? How we stand is important. And one of the little tips to help you understand what your natural stance is to just be standing up, take a few steps forward, and stop. And the width apart of your feet is a natural stance for you. So try and remember that next time you're presenting, just to walk a few steps, stop, look down at your feet, and see where they're comfortable, and that's your natural stance. Hand gestures, another interesting one. And I have so many questions about this in the workshops that I do, about people being told they really shouldn't use their hands. And what often happens to them is they end up shoving their hands into their pockets or not knowing what to do with their hands, and that actually looks more awkward than actually allowing your hands to be part of your story. So I'm a big advocate of using your hands in presenting, as long as they are not distracting. So using them with natural gestures. If you can imagine you have to tell somebody 3 important points by holding your fingers up, your index finger in the air, saying the first thing that's important, and then raising your next finger, the second thing, the third thing. That's another visual that helps keep people engaged. What you want to avoid is any kind of hand gesture that is repetitive and distracting, such as holding a pen in your hand, clicking that, or removing the top off a Sharpie marker, wringing your hands, spinning jewelry. I often see a lot of folks, a lot of engineers, if any of you are on the line, with those really lovely pinky rings, spinning those rings around. So try and avoid any kind of repetitive motion with your hands that distracts from your message. But do use your hands. It does really help with the story. Movement. Very important to think about how you move during a presentation. Many people like to stand right behind a podium and never leave. Oftentimes it's a barrier. People feel safer. There's something between themselves and the audience. If you can move at all, if you have a wireless microphone that you can use, I would encourage you to move around your audience. instead of staying rooted in one place. When we move around, we can engage with our audience. We can give them different sight lines to see us. It's when we move with purpose that we have impact. It's when we move and it's not purposeful that it becomes distracting. And that would look like swaying back and forth, rocking on one foot, walking back and forth in a consistent pattern. So move and move naturally. The only key to moving would be know when you need to be back up to advance your slide if you're not using a remote, which I would highly encourage. But go ahead and move around. Practice some movement. Another good tip with movement is if you're feeling nervous and anxious, when you move around your audience, it's not as obvious. People can't see your knees shaking at the front. So go ahead and move. It really helps with nerves. Eye contact. Eye contact is another important aspect of body language. Eye contact allows us to look out into our audience and read our audience. And when we get really, really proficient at presenting, it's an incredible tool to help you see if your audience is connecting with you or not. If you look out and you see yawns and glazed eyes and people just disengaged, it's probably time for a break. So look at your audience. Scan your audience as you present. And there's a couple types of eye contact that you want to avoid. One is that eye contact, and maybe you've been the lucky recipient of it if you've been a participant in a presentation, is where the presenter locks onto one person and stares. Very uncomfortable for the person in the audience. Sometimes for the presenter, it could be that one friendly face that is less intimidating than others. But you don't want to get stuck just looking at one person, nor do you want to be looking at too many people in like a fleeting or sketchy kind of eye contact. Good eye contact around the room is important. So be very mindful of trying to do that when you're presenting instead of looking above people or looking down. Look out into your audience. It's how you connect. Voice. That's that 38%. How you sound is really important. Your volume. Are you too loud? Are you too soft? Great idea to get somebody in the audience that you know that can give you a thumbs up, meaning you need to be louder, or thumbs down, you're too loud, or the okay sign for I can hear you just perfectly. So our volume is important. Our pace. Are we too fast? Are we too slow? Remember, if you're presenting to audience participants who may not have English as their first language, you need to slow down. When we speak too quickly, we tend to stumble over our words. So if that's happening to you, slow down. Nothing wrong with a nice slow pace. It gives your audience a chance to track with you. Are you articulate and clear? That's also important. Clarity. And slowing down helps you speak much more clear, clean, and crisp. The other piece would be your expression, adding some inflection in your voice. We all know what monotone means. If we're speaking in a monotone voice where there's no rising or lowering of our pitch, we can bore people and see people falling asleep. So try to add drama. The other piece that's not in here, or the point that's not on this slide, is the use of pausing. And I would encourage you to pause throughout your presentation. Although it might seem like a big piece of time for you, it doesn't for your audience. They have a chance to think about what you're saying, to really digest that information. It gives you a chance as a presenter to breathe a little and think about your next thought. And lastly, language. This accounts for that 7% that we spoke about. So your language really matters. It's important too. And what do we mean by that? Probably the most important thing that I would say to you is clarity, simple language. Quite often, I work with participants who want to use really big, complicated, complex words. Sounds brilliant, but sometimes people in the audience don't know what those words mean. And the last thing we want to do is confuse our audience or lose them. So just think about that KISS methodology of keeping things simple. Simple language, conversational, so your message is clear. I'm also a huge fan of storytelling. So finding stories from your professional life that can be used to draw comparisons or analogies that help your participants connect your story to their situation and really help people remember your message.
So, Julie, as you've been sharing all of these suggestions with those who are listening today, there have been a few questions that have come in that I'd love to just put forward to you if we could.
Sure.
So starting off, one person asking a question about, what if you have an accent when you're delivering? You've mentioned slowing down pace. Would that be a suggestion for somebody who may have an accent or a thicker accent to be able to make sure that their audience is able to understand clearly?
Yes, most definitely. That is exactly what you want to do, is slow down your pace in your presentation and really enunciate those words clearly, as clear as you can. And, really don't be afraid if you're in the audience or you are the person presenting to ask for some clarification. There's certainly nothing wrong with doing that. Asking if your audience is understanding that, are they tracking with you, if there are any questions along the way. That's a sign of a really good presenter, to really tap in every once in a while and make sure people are still tracking with you.
Okay, great. And another question coming in asking for suggestions about how do you manage the sign and symptoms of stress when you're delivering? So if you know that your voice might tremble, your hands may be shaking, or you may be physically shaking as well. Any suggestions for how to work through that when you're going into a presentation?
Yes, that's another great question. And, I'll give you a couple tips. In an hour, we certainly can't cover that in great detail like we'd like to, and we do that in our full-day workshop. But a couple of things. Number one thing to remember is we often feel more nervous on the inside than we appear on the outside. What does that mean? It means we're harder on ourselves than we really need to be. I'm a big advocate of videotaping myself presenting, or have someone videotape you when you're presenting. And when you watch that back, we really don't appear as nervous as we think we are. So that's the first thing to keep in mind, is be kind to yourself. The next thing I would say to you is practice, practice, practice. Practice some breathing again, those power poses. Take a deep breath before you get started so you can get the maximum amount of air in, and then start presenting. So there's a lot of great strategies. Those are just a few to get you started.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I know that you have a point coming up to talk about the presenting in a virtual environment, because somebody did ask that, when you reviewed the results here about the fact that 55% relies on visual, someone was curious to know about what does that mean when you're presenting in a virtual environment. So how do you manage the interaction when people can't physically see you?
Yes, well, good timing. That's where we are now. So this is a whole other challenge, right? When we're face-to-face, we can pick up on that body language. We can pick up on tone of voice. But what we're doing right now, it's really difficult to see how our audience is engaging with us. So what I would suggest that you do in a virtual environment is some of these things that we've been talking about with our voices. So using your voice for you so that you can practice that rate, that volume, that pitch, and vary your voice in order to keep people engaged on the other end. Avoid that being monotonous, that sound, that monotone. So vocal variety is one piece, as well as what we're actually doing today, having participants involved in the chat board, the polling discussions, so we can really engage people without seeing them. Keeping things interactive so people aren't dozing off or disengaging on the other end. That's the best way to work in a virtual environment. And back again to telling stories, sharing analogies, comparisons, making sure that our PowerPoints, if we're using a PowerPoint like you see today, that the slides are interesting for people to look at. Remembering that 55% is visual, so that's also what we see in front of us. So we often refer to CPR in building a PowerPoint presentation, and that's nice color, good placement of images, of font, and good readability. So all of those things help us when we can't be face-to-face. So it's really leveraging the pieces of how you sound and the words and the slides that you use, because we don't have that face-to-face connection to help us along.
Great. And I wonder, too, Julie, if one of the things that you mentioned earlier on today in terms of secret number one, target the presentation to your audience. In my experience, when you're presenting in a virtual environment, the suggestion you had made earlier about trying to understand who you're presenting to and what's in it for them, that often when you've got the virtual connection, it's nice to be able to build relationships with people in advance of having to present or share information. Because it helps to boost the credibility as you're going into a discussion and people know what they're coming into, and they're likely to be a little bit more engaged in that forum in particular.
Yes, thanks, Christina. Absolutely. And I'm often asked, how do I find out who's going to be there? Well, it's not always easy, but when you can, I would try and find out as much information as possible. The person that has asked you to make the presentation, spend a couple of minutes asking them, hey, can you tell me who's going to be attending this? What's their background? If there's an organizational chart in your company, find out who some of these people are that may be attending. If it's outside of your company, we have such great technology now that we can go onto Google or we can utilize LinkedIn to find out who these folks are from other companies who might be attending in person or, say, in a virtual audience. So do as much of the research as you can prior to, if you have the time, to find out who is attending. And it does help to know who's on the other end of that screen or who's sitting in the chairs in your audience.
And I know we're going to move ahead to Secret 5, Julie, but someone is asking, would you consider using a tool that allows your audience to see you during a webinar, something like a webcam?
Great question. I would absolutely say yes, if you've practiced with the technology and you're not going to be, dropping the image throughout, causing a distraction, because that itself could become a distraction if you're not comfortable with the technology. But most definitely, if you are, that's that face-to-face piece that's really, really vital to being able to see if a person is engaging with you. So I would say you have to ensure you have the right environment. You need to look professional, be obviously back to that appearance, being dressed appropriately, professionally, remembering that you are on screen and being mindful of your actions when you're doing that. But absolutely, if you have the technology and you're able to do that, you can really get a good sense of if the audience members are tracking with you, if they're engaged, if people are really getting your message.
Great, thanks, Julie. So I can move ahead to Secret 5.
Okay. Secret 5, asking for feedback. Most of us are uncomfortable with feedback, but it's really, really important to finding out how we're doing. So I would encourage you to ask for feedback often. It's the only way that we can improve, is being open to feedback. Just like athletes, if you think about elite athletes, they're at the top of their game, but yet they still have coaches. They're still getting feedback on how to improve even more. So a couple of ways that I suggest you get feedback. Well, firstly, if you have a presentation ready to go and you have an opportunity to do a trial run of that with a trusted colleague or friend or somebody at home, is to go ahead and do that presentation and get some feedback on what worked, what went well, how that sounded, does that story make sense? Ask some questions. So asking for feedback. The other really great way is to videotape yourself. And I know a lot of people are really uncomfortable doing this, but it is such a amazing way to see yourself in action. And with the smartphones that exist today and the technology, it's really easy to do this, setting up your own smartphone and videotaping yourself. So most definitely ask for feedback often. It's really, really critical to improvement. And I would also encourage you to practice, practice, practice. Take as many opportunities to put your hand up and take the next presentation, even if you're uncomfortable doing it. It's really the only way that we can improve is by taking those presentations, even though we may not want to, and saying, you know what, I'll do that next one, and planning for it, and not being too hard on ourselves. So master something, work on your body language, and then once you feel comfortable with that, move on to something else. So try not to change everything at once. It's really small steps that help us improve. And I like to say that it's really through action and putting yourself in those positions, stepping out of your comfort zone just a little, that we get better. And the analogy that I really like to use is it's really like riding a bicycle. We can read as many books on how to ride a bicycle, but it's until we actually get onto the bike and start pedaling and finding our balance that we really learn how. So presenting is really just the same. So getting a lot of practice, it's a way to get better, and I see it all the time in the workshops that I do. So that's really the key, is to get out there and make as many presentations as you can, from small ones to just 2 people and working your way up to larger ones.
Well, and I think given the results of the poll, Julie, that a lot of people say that they can do it. They're uncomfortable doing it, but they can do it. I think people know that they can, but I think the suggestion to practice is great. And we have one question here from Eva, who says, when I practice on my own, I'm very confident, but as soon as I get in front of the group, I forget what I should be talking about and read a little bit more instead of speaking or engaging with the audience. So any suggestions on how to overcome that?
Yes. What I would encourage you to do is take some note cards up there with you. For some reason, people seem to think they have to memorize a presentation. I'm actually against memorizing a presentation. I think we risk getting nervous and forgetting a few key points. So what I would encourage you to do is, once you have that draft of your presentation done up, back to that parameter slide that I showed you earlier, once you have the content of your presentation, nothing wrong with bringing up a one-page piece of paper or some note cards that have some trigger words to help guide you through. We don't want to be reading long sentences, but what we want to try and do is have some words, a few simple statements that help take us along on the presentation that we can refer to, that jog our mind about, oh, yes, this is what I have to talk about on the next slide. So that would be my recommendation for you there. Until you're comfortable enough with the content, you may get to the point where you don't need those notes, but always nice to have them as a safety net.
And we've got a question from Linda asking, does it look bad to refer to your notes too often? But I think based on what you've now shared with us, Julie, that if you've got bullet points that can jog or trigger your memory on what you wanted to say about a particular point rather than reading a script, that would help deter you from looking at your notes too often.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And if you are going to be a master of ceremony or somebody who's facilitating a broader meeting, could you follow the same tips that we've reviewed today, or the same secrets that we've reviewed with the group? Or would it be different?
Absolutely.
Than that? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, you may modify or tweak them slightly, but really these 5 secrets apply to any kind of presentation that you're doing, whether it's personal or professional. Knowing who's in your audience, knowing your purpose, having a framework that you can follow, that avoids that rambling on. Being aware of how you look up there, what you're wearing, spending that time to ensure that you're not playing with the marker lid or you're not rocking back and forth, and asking for some feedback. Always wise to ask for some feedback.
Okay, great. So we do want to hear from those of you who have been on the line today in terms of what's one key takeaway that you'll implement right away based on what we've shared with you. So we'd love to hear from you, for you to put your thoughts into the chat panel and let us know what's one key takeaway that you're going to start to implement right away. And there are a few questions still coming in, Julie, a lot of them connected into nervousness. Some people saying that they've been told that their voice rises when they're nervous. They're still struggling with the shakiness going into a presentation. So I'm wondering if we could come back to the power pose just briefly and talk about the impact of that, because really there's a chemical response happening within your body when the adrenaline's pumping that would help to strike some of those nerves. So how can the power pose help to overcome that and boost confidence?
Well, great question. It's putting yourself into those poses, standing tall, making yourself larger, feeling powerful. I'm also a big advocate of visualization, and that's part of this power posing, but seeing yourself do well and really playing a tape over and over in your mind about how you're going to do. You're going to stand tall, power pose, feel confident, you've planned your presentation, you've spent some time thinking about what you're going to say, knowing who your audience is. It's all little things that add up that really help boost your confidence. Breathing is a big, big piece of that as well. If you really feel nervous, if any of you do yoga out there, there's something in yoga that's called the Ujjayi breath, which is that deep belly breath, where when we breathe, it starts from low down in our stomach. It's having one of those big cleansing breaths, breathe in and out, and doing that before you jump up on stage to present. Getting a great night's sleep the night before, having some food in your stomach, making sure you've planned ahead, taking a sip of water before you present. There's a whole list of things that really help to battle your nerves. But the one thing I want you to be really aware of is it's okay to be nervous. Every single person that presents, people that do it for a living, still get nervous. And that's okay. It's finding a way to harness those nerves or that adrenaline to make it work for you. I'd say if we're not nervous and we become complacent, our presentations aren't as good. So it's okay to be nervous.
Well, and clearly there's not, there's only so much we can cover in 1 hour, Julie, in terms of reviewing the 5 secrets. But as you said, practice definitely helps to master the skills. So we have included some details here on upcoming courses that we have on these topics that you can definitely go to our website to check out at cmcoutperform.com. For those of you who are looking for access to be able to report and claim for PDUs for participating in today's session, the information is posted on your screen so that you have access to take a look at it. And, of course, we are always interested in hearing your feedback on future topics that may be of interest. So you're welcome to post those into the chat panel for us or to provide us with feedback on the survey that you'll be asked to complete when you wrap up today's session. But, Julie, I want to take a moment to thank you so much for your sharing your insights with us and also your time so that we could benefit from your many years of experience and expertise. So thank you for being with us. And for those of you who are on the line today, thank you also for joining us. As we said, you will get access to a recording of today's session so that you can come back and reference a lot of the great information that Julie shared with us and, of course, the 5 secrets of successful presenters. Thank you for participating today.
Great. Thanks, Christina. Yeah, I encourage everyone to go out and make a presentation. Thanks so much for your time.